The morning air in New Detroit carried the familiar scent of rust and recycled atmosphere as Maya Chen walked through the crowded streets toward the testing center. Her worn boots made soft clicking sounds against the metal walkways that connected the towering hab blocks, where humanity's survivors lived packed together like sardines. Around her, beings from dozens of different worlds moved with purpose. The tall, blue-skinned Zephyrians glided past with their natural grace, their crystalline hair catching the artificial sunlight that filtered through the dome. A group of Korath younglings chittered excitedly nearby, their 6 arms gesturing wildly as they discussed their upcoming entrance exams for the Galactic Confederation Academy. Maya pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and tried to ignore the stares. Even after 50 years since humanity's admission to the Confederation, humans were still considered the newest and least impressive member species. Their home world was a backwater planet in a forgettable star system, and their technology was centuries behind everyone else's. The testing center loomed ahead, a massive structure of gleaming metal and energy fields that seemed to pulse with its own life. Maya had dreamed of this moment for years, studying every piece of information she could find about the Academy. The Galactic Confederation Academy was the most prestigious institution in known space, training the next generation of leaders, scientists, and explorers who would shape the future of thousands of worlds. Inside the center, Maya joined a line of hopeful candidates. The Vorthon next to her stood nearly 8 feet tall, his green scales shimmering as he reviewed notes on a holographic display that emerged from his wrist device. Behind her, a Selenite female hummed a complex mathematical sequence under her breath, her large eyes never blinking as she calculated probabilities in her head. Maya clutched her simple tablet. The screen cracked from years of use. She had downloaded every free Academy prep program she could find, staying up late into the night studying physics, xenobiology, and galactic history by the light of her tablet. Her parents worked double shifts in the manufacturing districts just to afford the application fee. The testing proctor, a stern-looking Andromedian with silver skin and 4 eyes, called out the rules in the universal trade language. Maya's translator implant, a basic model that was barely functional, struggled to keep up with the rapid speech. She caught enough to understand that the test would measure intellectual capacity, problem-solving ability, and what they called adaptive potential. When her name was called, Maya followed a floating guidebot through corridors lined with displays showing Academy students from across the galaxy. She saw Korath engineers designing faster-than-light engines, Zephyrian diplomats negotiating peace treaties, and Vorthon military strategists planning defense formations that protected entire star systems. The testing chamber was small and sterile, containing only a chair and a smooth metal desk. As soon as Maya sat down, the desk's surface came alive with swirling patterns of light. Questions began appearing in her native language, starting simple but quickly becoming more complex. The first section tested basic knowledge, covering everything from quantum mechanics to xenobiology. Maya found herself answering questions about the mating rituals of gas giant dwellers and the political structure of the Outer Rim colonies. Her years of independent study paid off as she worked through problems that would have stumped many of her human peers. The second section was different. Instead of questions with clear answers, the desk projected 3-dimensional puzzles that shifted and changed as she manipulated them. One showed a failing space station with multiple critical systems offline. Maya had to figure out how to reroute power, manage life support, and coordinate evacuation procedures, all while dealing with a solar storm that was interfering with communications. As she worked, Maya began to notice something strange. The problem seemed to be adapting to her responses, becoming more challenging in areas where she showed strength and probing her weaknesses in unexpected ways. It was as if the test itself was learning about her, mapping not just what she knew but how she thought. The final section was the most unusual of all. The desk went dark, and then Maya found herself in what appeared to be a vast space filled with floating geometric shapes. She realized this was some kind of virtual reality environment, but unlike anything she had experienced before. The shapes pulsed with different colors and emitted various tones when she touched them. At first, Maya couldn't understand what she was supposed to do. There were no instructions, no clear objective, but gradually she began to notice patterns in the shape's behavior. When she arranged certain combinations, they would resonate together, creating harmonious sounds and synchronized light displays. It reminded her of the music theory she had taught herself, but extended into dimensions she had never imagined. Hours passed, though Maya had lost all sense of time. She found herself completely absorbed in the challenge, discovering that the geometric shapes could be combined in increasingly complex ways. What started as simple melodies became symphonies of light and sound that seemed to tell stories about distant worlds and alien civilizations. When the test finally ended, Maya felt drained but exhilarated. She had never experienced anything like it. The virtual environment faded away, leaving her back in the sterile testing chamber with its simple desk and chair. The Andromedian proctor appeared on a wall screen, her 4 eyes studying something off camera. After a long moment, she looked directly at Maya with an expression that was difficult to read. "Candidate Chen," the proctor said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "Your test results will be processed and sent to your registered address within 7 standard days. Thank you for your participation in the Academy selection process." Maya left the testing center in a daze, barely noticing the crowds of aliens around her as she made her way home. The other candidates she passed looked confident, discussing the test questions with their friends and family members who had come to support them. Maya walked alone, as she always did. Back in her family's small apartment, her parents asked how it went, but Maya struggled to explain. How could she describe the feeling of manipulating those geometric shapes, or the way the test seemed to respond to her thoughts? Instead, she simply said it was challenging and that she would know the results soon. That night, Maya lay in her narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling where she had pasted printouts of star charts and Academy promotional materials. She tried not to hope too much. Humans had never performed particularly well on Academy entrance exams, and she knew that thousands of brilliant candidates from across the galaxy were competing for only a few hundred spots. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened during that test. Something that might change everything. 7 days came and went without any word from the Academy. Maya tried to maintain her normal routine, helping her mother sort recycled materials at the processing plant and studying advanced mathematics in the evenings. But every time she heard the message chime on their old communication terminal, her heart would skip. By the 10th day, she had convinced herself that no news meant bad news. The acceptance letters had probably already gone out to the successful candidates. Maya had seen the local news reports about Zara Voss, a human girl from the wealthy Europa district who had received her Academy acceptance with great fanfare. If someone like Maya had been chosen, surely they would have heard by now. On the 12th day, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual automated message delivery, there was a knock at their apartment door. Maya opened it to find a tall figure in an Academy uniform standing in the corridor. The being had the distinctive blue skin and crystalline hair of a Zephyrian, but wore the silver insignia of a senior Academy representative. "Maya Chen?" the visitor asked, checking a glowing tablet. When Maya nodded, the Zephyrian smiled. "I am Commander Lyrian Valdris, Director of Special Admissions for the Galactic Confederation Academy. May I come in?" Maya's parents, who had been eating dinner at their small table, looked up in surprise. Her father, still wearing his factory coveralls, quickly stood and offered the commander their best chair. The apartment felt even smaller with a Zephyrian inside it, especially one whose presence seemed to fill the room with quiet authority. "I apologize for the unexpected visit," Commander Valdris said, settling gracefully into the offered seat. "Your test results were quite unusual, and we felt this conversation was best conducted in person." Maya's stomach dropped. Unusual probably meant she had failed in some spectacular way. Perhaps her translator implant had malfunctioned, or she had misunderstood the instructions for the virtual reality section. She braced herself for polite rejection. "Miss Chen," the commander continued, "in my 30 years of overseeing Academy admissions, I have never seen test results quite like yours. Your performance on the standard knowledge sections was impressive, certainly above average for a human candidate. But it was your work in the adaptive problem-solving scenarios that caught our attention." The commander activated a holographic display that materialized above the table, showing complex 3-dimensional graphs and data patterns that Maya didn't recognize. "The final section of our entrance exam is designed to measure what we call pattern integration ability. It's a cognitive skill that allows someone to find connections between seemingly unrelated concepts and synthesize new solutions from existing knowledge." Maya, watched as the hologram showed recordings of her test session, displaying the geometric shapes she had manipulated and the sequences she had created. From this external perspective, the patterns she had discovered looked even more intricate and beautiful than she remembered. Most candidates approach this section as a puzzle to be solved, Commander Valdris explained. They try to find the correct answer through logical deduction. But you did something different. You treated it as a language to be learned, a form of communication to be understood. The patterns you created weren't just solutions to problems, they were expressions of concepts that our testing algorithms had never encountered before. Maya's father leaned forward, his weathered face creased with confusion. I'm sorry, Commander, but what does this mean? Is Maya accepted or not? The commander's smile widened, revealing teeth that sparkled like cut gems. Oh, she's most definitely accepted. But more than that, her results have been flagged for what we call the Prometheus track. The hologram shifted to show images of the academy itself, vast campuses floating in space, connected by energy bridges that spanned thousands of kilometers. Students from hundreds of different species moved through corridors that seemed to bend and reshape themselves, attending classes that took place in environments ranging from artificial black holes to miniature galaxies. The Prometheus track is reserved for students who show exceptional potential for breakthrough thinking, the commander explained. These are individuals who don't just learn existing knowledge, but who have the capacity to create entirely new fields of study. In the Academy's 1,000-year history, fewer than 50 students have been selected for this program. Maya found her voice at last. What would this mean? What would I study? That's the beauty of the Prometheus track, Commander Valdris replied. You wouldn't follow a predetermined curriculum. Instead, you would work directly with our most advanced researchers and theorists, pursuing questions that haven't been asked yet. Your test results suggest you have an intuitive understanding of pattern dynamics that could revolutionize everything from interstellar navigation to consciousness transfer technology. The weight of what the commander was saying began to sink in. Maya had spent her entire life feeling like an outsider, even among her own species. Humans were the newcomers to the galactic community, barely tolerated by the established civilizations. The idea that she might have something unique to contribute seemed impossible. There is one condition, the commander added, and Maya's heart sank. The Prometheus track requires students to spend their first semester in complete isolation from other academy students. This allows them to develop their unique perspectives without being influenced by conventional thinking. You would work alone with a single mentor, usually one of our most senior professors. Maya's mother, who had been quietly listening, spoke up for the first time. How long would she be gone? When would we see her again? The Academy operates on accelerated time due to our proximity to the Kepler flux, the commander explained gently. What seems like 4 years of study to Maya would only be 6 months in normal time. However, contact with family is limited during the Prometheus track to prevent external pressures from interfering with the student's development. The room fell silent as the implications settled in. Maya looked at her parents, seeing the mix of pride and fear in their eyes. They had sacrificed so much to give her opportunities they had never had, working extra shifts and saving every credit so she could pursue her education. But the idea of losing their daughter to something as vast and unknowable as the Academy clearly terrified them. I need time to think about this, Maya said finally. Commander Valdris nodded approvingly. A wise response. Rushing into such a decision would be foolish. You have 1 standard week to give us your answer. However, I should mention that if you decline the Prometheus track, you would still be welcome in our regular program. Your scores certainly qualify you for standard admission. After the commander left, Maya and her parents sat in stunned silence. The holographic display had vanished, leaving their small apartment feeling even more cramped and ordinary than before. Maya stared at the Academy promotional materials she had taped to the walls, images that had once seemed like impossible dreams, but now represented a choice that could change everything. That night, Maya walked out onto the apartment building's observation deck, a small platform that offered a view of the city and the stars beyond. Other residents sometimes came here to escape the crowds below, but tonight she was alone. Looking up at the stars, Maya tried to imagine what it would be like to leave everything she had ever known behind. The Academy existed in a realm beyond anything she could comprehend, where students learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. If the commander was right, she might have the potential to contribute something truly meaningful to the galaxy's store of knowledge. But the cost would be enormous. 6 months might not sound like much to the Academy, but to her parents it would mean watching their only child disappear into a world they could never understand or follow her into. Maya had always been different, but she had never been truly alone. The week passed in a blur of conversations, sleepless nights, and careful consideration. Maya's parents, despite their fears, encouraged her to accept the opportunity. "You've always been meant for something bigger than this place," her mother said, gesturing around their small apartment. "We knew that from the day you taught yourself to read star charts when you were 7 years old." On the final day, Maya sent her acceptance message to Commander Valdris. The response came within minutes. Transportation would arrive in 3 days, and she should pack only personal items of sentimental value. Everything else would be provided by the Academy. The transport that arrived was unlike anything Maya had ever seen. It looked like a droplet of liquid mercury that had been frozen in mid-fall, its surface perfectly smooth and reflective. When Commander Valdris emerged from what appeared to be solid metal, Maya realized that the ship's technology was so advanced that even its basic functions seemed like magic. The farewell with her parents was difficult, but brief. They had said everything that needed saying over the past few days. As the transport lifted off from the Hab Block's landing pad, Maya watched through the transparent hull as her neighborhood, then her city, then her entire world shrunk away into a blue-green dot suspended in space. The journey to the Academy took 2 weeks, during which Maya experienced her first taste of faster-than-light travel. The ship didn't seem to move in any conventional sense. Instead, reality itself seemed to bend and shift around them, creating a sensation that was part exhilaration and part vertigo. Commander Valdris spent the time preparing Maya for what she would encounter, explaining concepts that challenged everything she thought she knew about physics and consciousness. "The Academy exists partially outside normal space-time," the commander explained as they approached their destination. "This allows us to accelerate learning and research in ways that would be impossible on a planetary surface. But it also means that students sometimes experience what we call reality displacement during their first few weeks." When the Academy finally came into view, Maya understood why preparation had been necessary. The structure defied every principle of engineering she had ever studied. Crystalline spires twisted through dimensions that her eyes couldn't quite process, connected by bridges of pure energy that seemed to support nothing but somehow bore the weight of massive buildings. Students and faculty moved between sections using transportation methods that ranged from conventional corridors to what appeared to be controlled teleportation. Maya's quarters were located in the Prometheus Wing, a section of the Academy that existed in a state of temporal isolation from the rest of the facility. Here, the handful of students selected for the special program could pursue their research without the distractions of regular Academy life. Her room was larger than her family's entire apartment, with walls that could display any environment she chose and a private laboratory space equipped with instruments she didn't recognize. Her mentor turned out to be Professor Kethvar, a being so ancient that their species had gone extinct millions of years ago. They existed now as a pattern of conscious energy maintained by Academy technology, appearing as a shifting constellation of lights that somehow conveyed both wisdom and gentle humor. "I have been teaching for over 8,000 years," Professor Kethvar explained during their first meeting, their voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "In that time, I have guided beings who went on to discover new laws of physics, create entire civilizations, and explore realms of knowledge that most consider impossible. But I have never worked with a human before." Maya felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. "Because humans aren't smart enough for this kind of work?" The professor's lights pulsed in what Maya learned was their equivalent of laughter. Quite the opposite, actually. Humans are the first species we've encountered in millennia that shows genuine potential for what we call orthogonal thinking. When Maya asked what that meant, Professor Kethvar led her to a chamber filled with floating geometric shapes, similar to those from her entrance exam, but infinitely more complex. These forms pulsed with their own light and seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Most species, no matter how intelligent, think in patterns established by their evolutionary history, the professor explained. Even we ancient races, for all our accumulated knowledge, are limited by the neural pathways that developed over millions of years of natural selection. But humans evolved in isolation, developing cognitive patterns that are completely unique in the known galaxy. Maya reached out to touch one of the floating shapes, and it responded by changing color and emitting a low harmonic tone. As she experimented with different combinations, patterns began to emerge that reminded her of the music theory she had studied, but extended into realms of mathematics and physics she had never imagined. Your species thinks in metaphors and analogies in ways that others do not, Professor Kethvar continued. You can see connections between disparate concepts that would never occur to minds shaped by different evolutionary pressures. This is why your test results were so unusual. You weren't solving the problems we presented. You were reimagining them entirely. Over the following weeks, Maya threw herself into her studies with an intensity that surprised even her. Working with Professor Kethvar, she began to explore questions that had puzzled galactic civilization for millennia. Why did certain mathematical constants appear in completely unrelated phenomena? How could consciousness exist independently of biological neural networks? What was the fundamental nature of the forces that held space-time together? The work was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Instead of memorizing facts or following established procedures, she was encouraged to trust her intuition and follow chains of thought wherever they led. Professor Kethvar would present her with ancient problems that had stumped the greatest minds in galactic history, then step back and let her approach them from whatever angle felt natural. Maya's breakthrough came during her 6th week at the academy. She had been studying the relationship between quantum entanglement and consciousness transfer when she suddenly realized that the geometric patterns from her entrance exam weren't just abstract puzzles, they were a form of universal language that described the fundamental structure of reality itself. Working feverishly for 3 straight days, Maya developed a theoretical framework that suggested all consciousness, whether biological or artificial, operated according to the same underlying pattern dynamics. If her theory was correct, it would be possible to map the structure of any conscious mind and translate it into a universal format that could be understood by any sufficiently advanced intelligence. When she presented her preliminary findings to Professor Kethvar, their usual gentle humor was replaced by something approaching awe. Maya, they said, their lights pulsing in rapid, excited patterns. What you've discovered here could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. This isn't just a new theory. It's the foundation for an entirely new field of study. But as Maya refined her work over the following days, she began to realize that her discovery had implications that went far beyond academic curiosity. If consciousness could be mapped and translated using universal patterns, it would be possible to achieve true communication between any 2 intelligent beings, regardless of their species or the form their consciousness took. More importantly, it might be possible to preserve consciousness indefinitely, transferring it between different substrates or even storing it in the pattern structures themselves. Death, as most species understood it, could become obsolete. Maya sat in her laboratory late one night, staring at the equations that covered every surface around her. The magnitude of what she had discovered was overwhelming. This wasn't just a student project anymore. It was work that could change the fundamental nature of existence for every conscious being in the galaxy. But there was something else, a nagging worry that she couldn't quite shake. Her theory suggested that consciousness was far more malleable than anyone had previously believed. If minds could be mapped and translated, what would stop someone from altering those maps? What would prevent consciousness from being edited, controlled, or even enslaved? Maya realized that her discovery, for all its potential benefits, also represented a danger unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. Maya's concerns about her discovery kept her awake for several nights. She found herself pacing the corridors of the Prometheus wing at odd hours, trying to work through the ethical implications of her research. The Academy's temporal isolation meant that while months were passing for her, only weeks had gone by in normal time. This gave her work an urgency that felt almost suffocating. During one of these restless nights, Maya encountered another Prometheus track student for the first time. She had assumed she was alone in this section of the Academy, but apparently other students existed in parallel temporal streams, occasionally intersecting with her own timeline. The student was a Korath named Zixtel, whose species was known for their exceptional mathematical abilities, unlike the excitable younglings Maya had seen during her entrance exam. Zixtal moved with the measured precision of someone much older. Their 6 arms worked independently as they manipulated complex holographic equations that floated around them like a personal storm of light and data. "You're the human," Zixtal said without looking up from their work. It wasn't a question. "Professor Kethvar mentioned you were working on consciousness mapping. Dangerous territory." Maya was surprised to find another student who knew about her research. "Why dangerous?" Zixtal finally turned their attention to Maya, their compound eyes reflecting the glow from their mathematical displays. "Because consciousness is the one thing that every species in the galaxy considers sacred. Start messing with it and you'll make enemies of everyone from the spiritual Zephyrians to the pragmatic Andromedians. But if we could truly understand consciousness, think about what we could accomplish," Maya said. "We could help beings who've suffered brain injuries, preserve the memories of dying civilizations, maybe even find ways to enhance cognitive abilities. Or create weapons more terrible than anything the galaxy has ever seen," Zixtal replied. "Imagine being able to rewrite someone's personality, steal their memories, or trap their consciousness in an artificial substrate where it could be tortured for eternity. Your research opens doors that some people think should stay closed forever." Maya hadn't considered the weaponization potential of her work, but as Zixtal spoke, she realized how naive she had been. Every great discovery in galactic history had eventually been turned into both tools of creation and instruments of destruction. Faster-than-light travel enabled exploration and trade, but also made interstellar wars possible. Genetic engineering cured diseases but also created biological weapons. "So what do you suggest?" Maya asked. "That I abandon the research?" Zixtal's expression softened slightly. "I suggest you be very careful about who you share it with. The Academy has protocols for dangerous research, but those protocols assume that the danger comes from external forces. They're not designed to handle discoveries that could threaten the fundamental nature of consciousness itself." Over the following days, Maya found herself torn between excitement about her work and fear of its implications. She continued refining her theories, but she also began researching the Academy's history with controversial discoveries. What she found was troubling. Several times in the Academy's 1,000-year existence, students or faculty had made discoveries that were deemed too dangerous for general knowledge. Sometimes these discoveries were classified and locked away in secure databases. Other times they were suppressed entirely, with all records destroyed and the researchers themselves subjected to memory modification to prevent the knowledge from spreading. Maya realized that her situation was far more precarious than she had understood. If the Academy decided her research was too dangerous, they had the power to not only destroy her work, but also erase her memory of ever having conceived it. She would return to her normal life never knowing what she had accomplished or lost. The thought of losing her discovery motivated Maya to take a risk that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Working in secret during the Academy's night cycle, she began encoding her research into the pattern structures themselves. Using the universal consciousness language she had discovered to embed her theories in a form that could only be detected by someone who already understood the underlying principles. It was like writing a message in a language that didn't exist until someone read it. The patterns she created looked like abstract art or mathematical curiosities, but they contained the complete framework for consciousness mapping hidden in their geometric relationships. Professor Kethvar noticed the change in Maya's work immediately. During their next session, they studied her latest pattern structures with what Maya had learned to recognize as intense concentration. "These are remarkable," the professor said finally. "The mathematical elegance is extraordinary. But there's something else here, isn't there? A deeper layer of meaning that I'm not quite grasping." Maya hesitated, then decided to trust her mentor. "I've been worried about the implications of my research. What if someone uses it for harmful purposes? What if the Academy decides it's too dangerous and destroys it?" Professor Kethvar's lights pulsed in a complex pattern that Maya had never seen before. When they spoke again, their voice carried a weight of ancient sadness. "In my 8,000 years of existence, I have seen many brilliant minds struggle with the same question you're facing now. Knowledge itself is neutral, but the beings who wield it are not. Every significant discovery creates the potential for both great good and terrible evil. So what do I do?" Maya asked. "You do what researchers have always done when faced with dangerous knowledge," the professor replied. "You find a way to preserve it while limiting its potential for abuse. But that decision cannot be made in isolation. You need allies, people you trust who can help you navigate the political and ethical complexities. Maya thought about this advice over the following days. She had been so focused on her research that she had barely considered the broader community she was now part of. The academy wasn't just a school. It was a vast network of some of the most intelligent beings in the galaxy, many of whom had faced similar dilemmas in their own work. Her opportunity to build those alliances came sooner than expected. Professor Kethvar announced that Maya's research had progressed to the point where she was ready for peer review, the process by which Prometheus track students presented their work to senior academy faculty for evaluation. The review would take place in the academy's Grand Assembly, a vast chamber that existed in a state of controlled temporal flux, allowing beings from different time streams to interact safely. Maya would have 15 minutes to present her findings to some of the most brilliant minds in galactic civilization. As Maya prepared for the presentation, she realized that this would be her chance to control how her discovery was introduced to the wider academy community. If she presented it as a purely academic exercise, it might be received as interesting but impractical theory. But if she demonstrated its real-world applications, she risked triggering the very suppression protocols she was trying to avoid. Maya spent her remaining preparation time crafting a presentation that would reveal the potential of her work while emphasizing the safeguards and ethical considerations that needed to be addressed. She embedded her most sensitive findings in pattern demonstrations that would look like artistic expression to casual observers but would reveal their true significance to anyone with the knowledge to decode them. The night before her presentation, Maya stood in her laboratory surrounded by the patterns and equations that represented months of intensive work. Tomorrow she would find out whether her discovery would be celebrated as a breakthrough or condemned as too dangerous to pursue. Either way, her life was about to change forever. The small human girl from the backwater hab blocks of New Detroit was about to address some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, armed with knowledge that could reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. Maya looked out through her laboratory's transparent walls at the impossible architecture of the academy. Stretching away into dimensions her mind could barely comprehend, somewhere out there in the normal flow of time. Her parents were probably finishing their evening meal and wondering how their daughter was adapting to life among the stars. They could never have imagined that she was about to present research that might determine the future of consciousness itself. The Grand Assembly Chamber was beyond anything Maya had imagined. The space seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with floating platforms arranged in impossible configurations that somehow allowed hundreds of beings to observe the central presentation area from optimal viewing angles. The temporal flux field created a subtle distortion that made everything appear to shimmer slightly, as if viewed through water. Maya stood on the central platform, looking up at an audience that represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Ancient ethereals hung in clusters of pure energy, their thoughts visible as cascading patterns of light. Massive Titan minds, beings whose individual neurons were the size of spacecraft, observed through remote sensing arrays that translated their vast consciousness into forms others could interact with. Even representatives of the mysterious Void Walkers had manifested, appearing as regions of space that seemed more empty than the vacuum around them. Professor Kethvar had taken a position near the presentation area. Their constellation of lights pulsing in what Maya had learned was an expression of nervous anticipation. In the months they had worked together, the ancient being had become not just a mentor but something approaching a friend, and Maya could sense their concern for what was about to unfold. The assembly moderator, a being of such advanced evolution that they appeared as geometric patterns of pure thought, called for attention. The chamber fell silent in a way that seemed to absorb not just sound, but the very concept of noise itself. "Student Maya Chen of Earth," the moderator announced. "You may present your research." Maya activated her holographic display system, and the central area of the chamber filled with the geometric patterns she had spent months developing. To most observers, they would appear as abstract mathematical art, beautiful but without obvious practical application. Only those with sufficient background in consciousness theory would recognize the deeper significance. "Fellow researchers," Maya began, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics to reach every corner of the vast space. I would like to present my work on what I call universal consciousness pattern theory. She began with basic principles, explaining how she had discovered that all conscious thought, regardless of its biological or artificial substrate, followed certain fundamental patterns. As she spoke, the holographic display shifted to illustrate her points, showing how thoughts in human brains followed the same underlying mathematical structures as quantum computations in artificial intelligences. The audience remained silent, but Maya could sense growing interest. Several of the ethereals began generating their own light patterns, comparing their thought processes to the examples Maya was presenting. A cluster of Korath mathematicians had activated their computational arrays and were running real-time analyses of her equations. The implications of this pattern universality are significant. Maya continued, moving into the more controversial aspects of her research. If consciousness follows universal mathematical laws, it should be possible to map any conscious mind into a standardized format that could be understood by any sufficiently advanced intelligence. A ripple of reaction passed through the assembly. Maya heard whispered conversations in dozens of languages, and several of the more conservative species began displaying signs of agitation. The Zephyrian delegation, in particular, seemed disturbed by the suggestion that consciousness could be reduced to mathematical formulas. Maya pressed on, demonstrating how her pattern theory could be used to create true universal translation, not just of languages but of thoughts and concepts themselves. She showed how memories could be preserved in pattern form, how damaged neural networks could be repaired by reference to healthy pattern templates, and how different forms of consciousness could communicate directly without the need for conventional language. The reactions were mixed, but intense. Half the assembly seemed fascinated by the possibilities Maya was presenting, while the other half appeared increasingly concerned about the implications. Maya realized she was approaching the critical moment where she would have to address the dangers inherent in her work. "I am aware," she said, pausing to let the chamber settle, "that this research raises significant ethical and security concerns. The ability to map and manipulate consciousness could be misused in ways that threaten the fundamental autonomy of all sentient beings." This acknowledgement seemed to calm some of the more agitated observers, but Maya noticed that several beings had left the assembly entirely. She suspected they were rushing to alert their respective governments about what they had heard. "However," Maya continued, "I believe these concerns can be addressed through careful implementation of safeguards and international protocols. The benefits of understanding consciousness at this fundamental level, curing mental illness, preserving dying cultures, enabling true communication between radically different forms of intelligence, are too significant to abandon due to fear of misuse." She concluded her presentation by demonstrating the pattern encoding technique she had developed, showing how sensitive information could be embedded within seemingly innocent mathematical structures. This was her way of suggesting that dangerous knowledge could be preserved safely, while remaining hidden from those who might abuse it. When Maya finished speaking, the Grand Assembly erupted into chaos. Dozens of conversations began simultaneously in languages both spoken and telepathic. The ethereal's light patterns became so intense that the chamber's systems had to adjust to prevent sensory overload. Several species demanded immediate closed-session discussions with their delegation leaders. The assembly moderator called for order, but it took several minutes for the noise to subside. When quiet finally returned, Maya found herself facing a barrage of questions that revealed just how profoundly her work had disturbed the established order. A representative of the Andromedian military coalition stood first. "Student Chen," they said, their four eyes fixed intently on Maya, "you have described techniques that could be used to extract information directly from captured prisoners, override the free will of enemy agents, or implant false memories in target populations. How do you propose to prevent these applications?" Before Maya could respond, a Zephyrian philosopher floated forward. "More fundamentally," they said, their crystalline hair chiming with agitation, "you suggest that consciousness itself can be reduced to mere mathematical patterns. This contradicts millennia of spiritual and philosophical understanding about the sacred nature of the soul." A Titan mind's massive communication array activated, filling the chamber with a voice like distant thunder. "The practical applications are remarkable," the vast intelligence rumbled. But the theoretical framework challenges our understanding of individual identity. If consciousness can be copied and transferred, what defines the continuity of self? Maya realized that she was facing the same questions that had kept her awake for weeks. But now they were coming from beings with the power to determine the fate of her research. She took a deep breath and began to address each concern systematically. Regarding military applications, she said, I propose that this research be conducted under international oversight, with strict protocols governing access to consciousness mapping technology. The same safeguards we use for genetic engineering or antimatter research could be adapted for this field. She turned to address the Zephyrian concerns. I don't believe my work reduces consciousness to mere mathematics any more than understanding the physics of light reduces the beauty of a sunset. The patterns I've discovered describe the structure of consciousness, not its meaning or value. For the Titan mind's question about identity, Maya had prepared her most carefully considered response. The continuity of self is indeed complex, but I believe my research actually supports the uniqueness of individual consciousness. The patterns I've mapped show that no two minds are identical, even when they share similar thoughts or memories. Each consciousness creates its own unique signature within the universal framework. The questioning continued for over an hour, with representatives from every major civilization probing different aspects of Maya's work. Some seemed genuinely interested in the potential benefits, while others appeared determined to find reasons to suppress the research entirely. Finally, the assembly moderator called for the formal evaluation phase. Maya was dismissed from the chamber while the assembled beings debated her fate. She waited in a small anteroom, pacing nervously as the minutes stretched into hours. Professor Kethvar appeared partway through the wait. Their lights dimmed with what Maya had learned to recognize as concern. The debate is intense, they reported. Your work has divided the assembly more than any student presentation in decades. Some are calling it the greatest breakthrough in consciousness studies since the development of artificial intelligence. Others are demanding that all records be destroyed and your memory modified to prevent the knowledge from spreading. Maya felt her stomach drop. What do you think will happen? I honestly don't know, the professor admitted. The Academy has protocols for handling dangerous research, but your work doesn't fit neatly into any existing category. You've discovered something genuinely new, which means Maya's new status as student of restricted sciences came with privileges she had never imagined and restrictions she was only beginning to understand. Her quarters were moved to a section of the Academy that existed in a state of temporal and dimensional isolation, so complete that she sometimes wondered if she was still in the same universe as everyone else. The security measures were subtle but pervasive. Every thought she had while working was monitored by systems so advanced that they could detect the formation of ideas before she was consciously aware of them. Her communications with the outside universe were filtered through multiple layers of oversight, ensuring that no sensitive information could accidentally leak to unauthorized recipients. Yet the resources available to her were extraordinary. Maya found herself with access to the Academy's most restricted databases, containing research that had been classified for millennia. She learned about discoveries that had shaped galactic civilization from the shadows, consciousness transfer experiments that had ended wars by allowing enemy leaders to truly understand each other's perspectives, memory preservation techniques that had saved entire cultures from extinction, and pattern manipulation methods that had been used to heal minds damaged by trauma beyond conventional therapy. Her new mentor was Director Ashkin Vale, a being so heavily modified by centuries of consciousness research that they existed as a hybrid of biological and artificial intelligence. Half their body was composed of living neural tissue from their original Korath physiology, while the other half consisted of quantum processing arrays that could simulate the thought patterns of any known species. Your predecessor in this role, Director Vale explained during their first meeting, was a Selenite mathematician named Zendar, who discovered how to map temporal paradoxes onto consciousness patterns. Their work was classified 300 years ago, when they proved it was theoretically possible to alter past events by modifying the observer's memory of them. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. What happened to them? They chose voluntary memory modification rather than live with knowledge they considered too dangerous to possess, Director Vale replied. Zendar returned to their home world with no memory of their time at the Academy. believing they had been rejected during the application process. They lived a quiet, happy life as a mathematics teacher until they died of natural causes 50 years later. The implication was clear. Maya could choose the same fate if the burden of her knowledge became too much to bear. But she also understood that this option came with a price, not just the loss of her memories, but the potential waste of discoveries that might benefit countless beings across the galaxy. Working under Director Vale's guidance, Maya began to explore applications of her consciousness mapping theory that went far beyond what she had initially imagined. They developed techniques for treating neural disorders that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia, created methods for preserving the memories of dying species, and even established protocols for peaceful first contact with radically alien forms of consciousness. But with each breakthrough came new ethical dilemmas. Maya discovered that her pattern recognition abilities allowed her to detect deception with unprecedented accuracy, effectively giving her a form of technological telepathy. She developed methods for enhancing cognitive abilities that could make any being significantly more intelligent, but which also raised questions about fair access and social inequality. Most troubling of all, Maya realized that her work was being observed not just by Academy oversight committees, but by intelligence agencies from every major galactic power. Despite the Academy's strict neutrality, her research had implications for military and political applications that no government could afford to ignore. The turning point came during her 8th month at the Academy. Maya was working on a particularly complex problem involving the preservation of collective consciousness in hive mind species when she received an unexpected visitor. Zixtal, the Korath student she had met in the Prometheus wing. "I'm not supposed to be here," Zixtal said without preamble, their 6 arms moving nervously as they checked the security scanners around Maya's laboratory. "But there's something you need to know about your research." Maya gestured for them to continue, though she wondered how Zixtal had managed to bypass the multiple security systems protecting her workspace. 3 weeks ago, a delegation from the hegemony visited the Academy, Zixtal explained, referring to the authoritarian alliance that controlled several hundred star systems in the galactic outer rim. "They weren't here for diplomatic purposes. They were trying to recruit students who might have access to your consciousness mapping research." Maya felt her blood run cold. The hegemony was known for using advanced technology to maintain control over their subject populations. If they gained access to consciousness manipulation techniques, they could potentially enslave entire worlds by altering the thought patterns of their inhabitants. "How do you know this?" Maya asked. "Because they approached me," Zixtal replied. "My work on mathematical prediction models caught their attention. They offered me resources and funding beyond anything the Academy could provide, plus citizenship in their core worlds. All I had to do was find a way to access your research data." Maya realized that her worst fears about the militarization of her work were already coming true. Despite all the Academy's security measures, hostile forces were actively trying to steal or corrupt her research for their own purposes. "What did you tell them?" she asked. "That I would consider their offer," Zixtal said. "It was the only way to learn more about their intentions without arousing suspicion." "But Maya, they're not the only ones. I've identified at least 6 different factions that are trying to gain access to your work through various means. Some are approaching students, others are recruiting Academy staff, and a few are even attempting to infiltrate the security systems directly." Maya sat down heavily in her laboratory chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Zixtal was telling her. She had known that her research was controversial, but she hadn't fully grasped how it was already changing the political landscape of the galaxy. "There's something else," Zixtal continued. "The Academy's governing council is meeting next week to discuss your future. There are rumors that some members want to accelerate your graduation and release you back to civilian life, hoping that removing you from the Academy will reduce the political pressure they're facing. But that would mean abandoning the research," Maya protested. "Not necessarily," Zixtal replied. "If you were to leave the Academy voluntarily, you could potentially continue your work independently. There are private research institutions that would provide funding and security, though they would expect certain considerations in return." Maya understood the implication. Private institutions meant corporate or government backing, which would inevitably compromise the neutrality of her research. But staying at the academy might mean having her work suppressed or herself removed from the project entirely. That night, Maya walked through the academy's observation galleries, looking out at the stars and thinking about the choice she was facing. In the distance, she could see ships from dozens of different civilizations docked at the academy's ports. Each one represented a different perspective on how her research should be developed and controlled. She thought about her parents, still living their quiet lives on Earth, unaware that their daughter had become a figure of galactic significance. She thought about Professor Kethavar, who had encouraged her to pursue knowledge wherever it led. And she thought about the countless beings across the galaxy who might benefit from her discoveries if they were developed. Responsibly, Maya realized that she was at a crossroads that would determine not just her own future, but potentially the direction of galactic civilization itself. The small human girl from the Hab blocks had discovered something that the most powerful beings in the universe wanted to control, steal, or destroy. The question now was whether she would find a way to use that power for the benefit of all conscious beings, or whether it would be corrupted by the very forces she had hoped to help understand each other better. As she stood there among the stars, Maya began to formulate a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane, but it was her plan, based on her research and her understanding of what consciousness mapping could really accomplish. She was going to change the rules of the game entirely. Maya's plan began with something that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. She was going to address the entire Galactic Council directly, bypassing the Academy's oversight entirely. But first, she needed allies who shared her vision of how consciousness mapping should be used. Working in secret during the Academy's night cycles, Maya used her pattern encoding techniques to embed messages in seemingly routine research reports. These messages could only be decoded by beings who understood consciousness theory at the level she had developed, effectively creating a hidden communication network among the galaxy's most advanced thinkers. Her first convert was Professor Kethavar, who had suspected something was developing when Maya's research reports began containing mathematical proofs that were more elegant than necessary for their stated purposes. When the ancient being decoded Maya's hidden message, they were both impressed by her ingenuity and concerned about the risks she was taking. "What you're proposing is unprecedented," Professor Kethavar said during a carefully orchestrated private meeting. "No student has ever addressed the Galactic Council directly. The political implications alone could destabilize the Academy's neutrality." "The Academy's neutrality is already compromised," Maya replied. "At least 6 different factions are actively trying to steal or control my research. If we don't act soon, consciousness mapping will become just another tool for the powerful to oppress the weak." Maya's hidden messages reached others across the Academy and beyond. Dr. Ysaandra, a Zephyrian consciousness researcher who had spent decades studying the spiritual implications of artificial intelligence, decoded the patterns and became fascinated by Maya's ethical framework. Commander Thane Rekortos of the Andromedian Fleet, whose military career had been dedicated to protecting civilian populations, recognized the potential for consciousness mapping to revolutionize conflict resolution. Most importantly, Maya's messages reached Sage Illuminar, one of the ethereals who had attended her Grand Assembly presentation. The ancient energy being had been studying consciousness for longer than most civilizations had existed, and they understood better than anyone how Maya's discoveries could reshape the fundamental nature of existence. Over the course of several weeks, this unlikely alliance developed a comprehensive proposal for the responsible development of consciousness mapping technology. Instead of restricting access to a few powerful institutions, they proposed creating an international oversight body that would ensure the technology was used for humanitarian purposes only. The proposal included safeguards that would prevent consciousness manipulation from being used for military purposes, protocols for preserving the autonomy of all sentient beings, and frameworks for sharing the benefits of the technology across all galactic civilizations regardless of their political or economic status. When Maya felt ready to present their plan, she made a decision that shocked even her closest allies. She was going to hijack the Academy's own communication systems to broadcast directly to the Galactic Council during their next scheduled session. Director Vale discovered the plan just hours before Maya intended to implement it. The hybrid being confronted her in her laboratory, their artificial components crackling with agitation, while their biological portions displayed the Korath equivalent of extreme concern. Student Chen, Director Vale said, "What you're planning constitutes a violation of Academy protocols that could result in your immediate expulsion and the permanent classification of all your research. Worse, it could compromise the Academy's relationship with the Galactic Council permanently." Maya looked up from the pattern encoding system she had been preparing for her broadcast. "Director, with respect, the current system isn't working. My research is being turned into a political weapon before it's even fully developed. If we don't act now, consciousness mapping will be used to oppress the very beings it was meant to help. And if you broadcast without authorization, you'll give every faction an excuse to claim the Academy is no longer neutral," Director Vale countered. "The political backlash could shut down consciousness research entirely. Or it could open up new possibilities that the current power structure would never allow," Maya replied. "Sometimes progress requires taking risks that the established order considers unacceptable." Director Vale studied Maya for a long moment, their hybrid consciousness processing implications at speeds that would have overwhelmed purely biological minds. Finally, they made a decision that surprised them both. "I cannot officially support what you're planning," Director Vale said carefully, "but I also cannot be present to prevent it if I happen to be called away on urgent Academy business for precisely the amount of time your broadcast would require." Maya understood the implicit support in those words. Director Vale was giving her the opportunity to proceed while maintaining plausible deniability for the Academy. The Galactic Council was in session, debating trade regulations for the Outer Rim territories, when Maya's signal interrupted their proceedings. Every screen in the vast chamber suddenly displayed her image, while her voice echoed through translation systems that reached every corner of galactic civilization. "Honorable delegates," Maya began, standing in her laboratory with pattern displays swirling around her like a symphony of light and mathematics. "I am Maya Chen, student of Restricted Sciences at the Galactic Confederation Academy. I come before you today not as a representative of any institution or government, but as a conscious being speaking to other conscious beings about the future of consciousness itself." The reaction in the council chamber was immediate and chaotic. Security systems activated as technicians tried to trace and block Maya's signal, while delegates demanded explanations from Academy representatives who appeared as surprised as anyone by the breach. But Maya's signal was encoded using her own consciousness mapping techniques, making it nearly impossible to interrupt without sophisticated pattern recognition software that only a few beings in the galaxy possessed. Her broadcast continued unimpeded. "Over the past year, I have developed techniques that allow us to map and understand the fundamental patterns underlying all conscious thought," Maya explained, her words reaching billions of beings across the galaxy. "This research could revolutionize our ability to heal damaged minds, preserve dying cultures, and enable true communication between radically different forms of intelligence." As Maya spoke, she demonstrated her discoveries using real-time pattern displays that showed the consciousness signatures of different species in the council chamber. Delegates watched in amazement as their own thought patterns were visualized and translated into universal mathematical forms. "However," Maya continued, "I have learned that multiple factions are attempting to weaponize this research for political and military purposes. If consciousness mapping is developed in secret by powerful institutions, it will become a tool of oppression rather than liberation." Maya's proposal for international oversight received mixed reactions from the council delegates. Progressive factions embraced the idea of democratizing access to consciousness mapping technology, while conservative powers worried about losing control over a potentially game-changing discovery. But the most significant reaction came from an unexpected source: the collective consciousness of the Void Walkers, the mysterious beings who rarely involved themselves in galactic politics. Their representative, a region of space that seemed more empty than the vacuum around it, spoke for the first time in over a century. "The young human speaks of consciousness with understanding that transcends her species' limited experience," the Voidwalker said, their words somehow conveying meaning without sound. "We have observed the development of her research with interest. It approaches truths that we have long guarded but never shared." The chamber fell silent. The Voidwalkers were rumored to possess knowledge about consciousness that predated most of galactic civilization, but they had never offered to share that knowledge with younger species. If the humans' proposal for open oversight is accepted, the Void Walker continued. We will contribute our own understanding to the development of consciousness mapping technology. But this knowledge comes with a responsibility that extends beyond any single species or government. Maya realized that her desperate gambit had achieved something she had never dared hope for. It had attracted the attention of beings whose understanding of consciousness far exceeded her own. The Voidwalker's offer to share their ancient knowledge could accelerate her research by centuries, but only if the galactic community agreed to develop it responsibly. The debate that followed Maya's broadcast lasted for weeks, with delegates from every major civilization arguing about the implications of consciousness mapping technology. But in the end, the combined pressure from progressive factions, the Academy's implicit support, and the Voidwalker's unprecedented offer created momentum for change. The Galactic Council voted to establish the Consciousness Research Consortium, an international body dedicated to the responsible development of consciousness mapping technology. Maya was invited to serve as the consortium's first chief researcher, a position that would allow her to continue her work while ensuring it served the benefit of all conscious